EDU 638, Curriculum Design and Instructional Improvement. The required text for this course is Curriculum Foundations, Principles and Issues by Alan C. Ornstein and Francis P. Hunkins. This course will give an overview of the chapter. However, it is not a substitute for reading the chapter. Please feel free to pause and rewind as needed. Chapter 2, Philosophical Foundations of Curriculum. Philosophy is essential to curriculum. In this chapter and the following two chapters, we will examine in greater detail the foundations of curriculum. In other words, how different traditional disciplines have influenced curriculum. A curriculum is developed based on certain beliefs and orientations, concepts of learning, and the demands of society. Through Chapter 2, we will focus on the philosophical beliefs that influence curriculum. As John Goodland points out, philosophy is the beginning point of curriculum decision-making and the basis for all subsequent decisions. Philosophy becomes the criterion for determining the aims, means, and ends of curriculum. It is crucial for nearly all decisions regarding teaching and learning. Let's begin. We're going to begin with the definition of philosophy. The word philosophy is a combination of the Greek word philos, which means love, and Sophia, which means wisdom, which translated means love of wisdom. Philosophers are people who seek after wisdom and curious about the world, seeking to understand the nature of things. Philosophy involves questions and our point of views as well as the views of others. It involves searching for defined values and clarifying our beliefs. Take a few minutes to read some of the questions that are asked among philosophers. Now, let's examine a branch of philosophy, namely philosophy of education. So what is philosophy of education? Most of the prominent philosophers in the last 2,000 years were not philosophers of education, but have at some point considered and written on the philosophy of education. Among them are Plato, Aristotle, Dewey, Adler, Confucius, and many more. These philosophers have been key voices in philosophy of education and have contributed to our basic understanding of what education is and can be. They have also provided powerful critical perspectives revealing the problems in education. What is the connection between philosophy and curriculum? Philosophy is central to curriculum. The philosophy of a particular school and its officials influences the goals, content, and organization of its curriculum. Usually, a school reflects several philosophies. This diversity enhances the curriculum's dynamics. Studying philosophies allow us not only to better understand schools and their curricula, but also to deal with our own personal beliefs and values. Philosophy deals with the larger aspects of life and the way we organize our thoughts and interpret facts. It is an effort to understand life, its problems and issues in full perspective. It involves questions and our own point of view, as well as the views of others. It involves searching for defined values and clarifying our beliefs. Philosophy also provides a basis for deciding which textbooks to use, how to use them, and how much homework to assign, how to test students and to use the best results, and what courses or subject matter to emphasize. It is now time for your Teaching Philosophy Forum. Through Moodle, write a statement which summarizes your views about teaching. Your philosophy statement needs to be one that you are willing and able to defend. You can find complete details for this assignment through your Moodle page. Be sure that you respond and submit through Moodle. Do not turn anything in to me. Take a few seconds to read this quote. Would you believe that the above statement was written more than 2,000 years ago by the Greek philosopher Aristotle, and we are still debating the same issues today? Sometimes one wonders whether we know what we want. We lament about the poor level of basic skills in students and call for a return to basics. At the same time, we want students to develop critical thinking skills and call for lesser emphasis on rote learning. Through the centuries, many philosophies of education have emerged, each with their own beliefs about education. Tyler's view of philosophy in relationship to school purpose. In Ralph Tyler's curriculum framework, philosophy is commonly known of 5 criteria used in selecting educational purposes. The relationships between philosophy and the other criteria, studies of learners, studies of contemporary life, suggestions from subject specialists, and the psychology of learning are all shown in the figure. Refer to your text for further explanation. Major philosophies. 4 major philosophies have influenced U.S. education: idealism, realism, pragmatism, and existentialism. The first 2 philosophies are traditional, the last 2 are contemporary. Idealism. Plato is often credited with formulating idealistic philosophy, one of the oldest that exists. The German philosopher Hegel presented a comprehensive view of the historical world based on idealism. To idealists, learning is a primarily intellectual process that involves recalling and working with ideas. Education is properly concerned with conceptual matters. The idealist educator prefers a curriculum that relates ideas and concepts to one another. The curriculum is hierarchical. It constitutes humankind's cultural heritage and is based on learned disciplines, as exemplified by the liberal arts curriculum. At the top of the hierarchy are the most abstract subjects, things like philosophy and theology. Mathematics, too, is important because it cultivates abstract thinking. History and literature rank high because they offer moral and cultural models. Language is also important because it enables communication and conceptual thought. Lower on the curricular ladder, however, are the sciences, which deal with particular cause and effect relationships. Next, we will discuss realism. Aristotle is often linked to the development of realism, another traditional school of thought. Realists view the world in terms of objects and matter. People can come to know the world through their senses and their reason. Everything is derived from nature and is subject to its laws. Human behavior is rational when it conforms to nature's laws and when it is governed by physical and social laws. Realism curriculum. Logic and lessons that exercise the mind and that cultivate rational thought are stressed. 3 R's: writing, reading, and arithmetic. It's ethical, political, and economic thought, and has organized separate subjects curriculum for sample study of humankind experience becomes history subject. Now for a realism video.
Realism by Francesca Pavente and Kelsey Ambrosen. Realism is one of the oldest philosophies of Western culture dating back to ancient Greece. But what exactly is realism? Realism is the counter-proposition of idealism. For one who believes in realism, science becomes important. A realist would say that the universe exists whether our mind perceives it or not. For example, when posed the question, if a tree falls and nobody is around to hear it, does it make a sound? A realist would say yes, it does. They would also say that the world of things is far superior to the world of ideas because whether we see it or not, the world is physically there. Realism can be broken down into 3 components: metaphysics, epistemology, and axiology. Realists stress the world of nature and physical things and do so through experiences and how we perceive these physical things. This is essentially what leads a realist to believe that reality is composed of 2 things, matter and form. Realists claim they know what they know through perception, rational thinking, and sensing. Sense realism emphasizes that knowledge comes from the senses and is sorted, classified, and categorized through one's mind. Aristotle, on the other hand, argued that perception was not the most efficient way to understand realism, and felt that deductive logic was the most effective way of understanding the world physically. Other realists felt that the scientific method was how knowledge was established through realism. Realists believe that one's values come from nature. They believe that natural law and moral law are the main determinants of what is good, and that this goodness can be achieved through living a virtuous life. Going along with this, they also felt that breaking away from this moral truth would injure individuals and society. Philosophers associated with realism include Aristotle, the father of realism, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, John Locke, and Johann Heinrich Pestalozzi.
In a realist world, education would be formed around the idea that we need to understand the material world through inquiry-based lessons. There would be a focus on science and the scientific method, as well as liberal arts. A realist would say that we need to teach and be taught a curriculum that not only expands our knowledge of the world, but also teaches us how to survive in today's society. They would also stress that we need to not only focus on the facts, but more importantly, what it took to arrive at those facts, and that all knowledge should be performance-based. An important factor of realism is the belief that positive behavior is brought about by positive rewards. A realist take on education would be systematic, organized, precise, and have a natural order. For instance, days would be scheduled by ringing bells, classes would be constructed in time periods, and there would be daily lesson plans, prepackaged lesson plans being ideal. Lessons would consist of physical activity and include lots of manipulatives and pictures. The lessons plan should also be interesting, enjoyable, and open to observation because a realist believes in the importance of play in the early stages of education. Finally, realists believe that education should be available to all and that it is the government's responsibility to make sure that this goal is achieved. To apply the realist philosophy in a modern classroom, we would provide situations that allow students to arrive at their own answers via experiments and observation, and would have a structured and organized classroom with weekly, and within that, daily routines. We would also create lessons that children enjoy and that make them excited to learn, and include as many opportunities as possible for students to play and exercise both in the classroom and at breaks in the day, such as recess. Remember, teaching is cyclical and is always open to change. Educators are constantly looking for ways to improve education, but a realist would say, in the end, we'll always return to the basics.
Pragmatism. In contrast to the traditional philosophies, pragmatism, also referred to as experimentalism, is based on change, process, and relativity, whereas idealism and realism emphasize subject matter. Pragmatism construes knowledge as a process in which reality is constantly changing. To pragmatists, teaching should focus on critical thinking. Teaching is more exploratory than explanatory. The method is more than the subject matter. The ideal teaching method is concerned not so much with teaching the learner what to think as with the teaching of the learner to critically think. Questions such as why, how come, and what if are much more important than what, who, or when. The great educational pragmatist was Dewey, who viewed education as a process for improving the human condition. Dewey saw schools as specialized environments within the larger social environment. Ideally, curriculum was based on a child's experiences and interests and prepared the child for life's affairs. The subject matter was interdisciplinary. Dewey emphasized problem solving and the scientific method. The Pragmatist Video.
As an educational philosophy, pragmatism, also known as experientialism, focuses on the reality of experience. This view states that reality constantly changes due to personal experience. This is in direct contrast to realism and idealism. Pragmatism denies any absolute or unchanging truth. William James, a proponent of pragmatism and leading psychologist during the 19th century, wrote, "Ideas become true just insofar as they help us to get into satisfactory relations with other parts of our experience." Because our reality changes so regularly, and truth is not a constant to rely on, pragmatists assert that we learn best through applying our experiences and beliefs to problems that we encounter. In effect, our ability to think and improve our understanding relies on our experience. Another important component of pragmatism is the application of evolution to education. John Dewey, an American philosopher, psychologist, and educational reformer, believed that evolution was not just a biological truth, but a metaphysical truth as well. To him, this meant that a person's knowledge and being is continuously changing and shifting, that the universe is in constant process. Because everything in the world, including knowledge, is perpetually changing, interaction with one's peers and environment is fundamental to pragmatism. This relates to education through group work. Yet again, experience is the basis of this philosophical component of pragmatism. You must experience another person's opinions and beliefs in order to more fully develop your own. Through group work, students are taught how to adapt to each other and their environment. In Dewey's mind, this fosters a cooperative classroom where different cultural and ethnic groups could learn how to contribute to their democratic society. The final component of pragmatism relates to the curriculum being taught. Other educational philosophies divide their curriculum into particular subject areas, such as history, geography, physics, chemistry, or mathematics. Pragmatism promotes the interdisciplinary nature of subjects through curricular groupings. Pragmatists believe in the connected and holistic nature of all knowledge. Therefore, combining history, geography, and economics into a social studies curriculum would give students a much clearer picture of the world around them. The same is true for the science studies curriculum. Instead of isolating subjects such as physics, chemistry, or biology, pragmatists combine them to highlight the connectedness of the world. Even though pragmatism impacted education the most during the late 1800s, its influence is still felt today. Perhaps its greatest contribution has been its emphasis on experimentation. Instead of requiring students to passively sit by while a teacher lectures, they are given hands-on activities that fully engage them in the learning process. Through experimentation, they are able to experience what they are learning. For example, if a class is learning about gravity, the teacher will not simply tell students that gravity exists. Instead, the teacher will set up a variety of experiments for students to explore the concept of gravity and see it in action for themselves. Because it allows students to be involved and active in their learning, it can actually help spark further inquiry. The other contribution to education has been the shift from purely individual learning to group work, which helps to expose students to a variety of views and opinions. Pragmatists believe that when students interact with one another, they are continuing to develop their knowledge and understanding. In the minds of 19th century pragmatists, this would help to teach young students how to interact in a democratic society. As we can see, pragmatism has had a lasting effect on education. Its emphasis on student experience has helped to promote many of the engaging learning activities that are prevalent in schools today. As future teachers, we should be aware of both the strengths and limitations of pragmatism in order to create the most effective classroom environment for our students.
Existentialism. Whereas pragmatism is mainly a U.S. philosophy that evolved just prior to 1900, existentialism is mainly a European philosophy that originated earlier but became popular after World War II. In U.S. education, Maxine Greene, George Kilner, and Van Clive Morris are well-known existentialists who stress individualism and personal self-fulfillment. According to existentialist philosophy, people continually make choices and thereby define themselves. We are what choices we choose to be. In doing so, we make our own essence or self identity. Hence, the essence we create is a product of our choices. This varies, of course, among individuals. Existentialists advocate that students be free to choose how and what they study.
The central tenet of existentialist philosophy is that the individual person is a free and responsible agent in determining their own development. Existentialism focuses on personal and subjective existence, not norms, standards, or universal truths. In existentialism, students develop into their own unique personalities, and the only authority is the self. Individuals must create their own meanings and decide what is true.
Now let's take a look at some of existentialism's main contributors. In developing the existentialist philosophy, Søren Kierkegaard is known as the father of existentialism. Kierkegaard, who was born in 1813 and passed away in 1855, was a Danish author, poet, theologian, philosopher, and social critic. Kierkegaard renounced scientific objectivity for subjectivity and personal choice. Another leading contributor was Jean-Paul Sartre, the most widely known existentialist. Sartre was born in 1905 and passed away in 1980. He was a French philosopher, writer, political activist, and literary critic. Sartre is the author of Being and Nothingness, written in 1956, which is considered one of the major philosophic treatises of the 20th century. According to Sartre, humanity exists without any meaning until we construct our own.
Existentialism had important effects on the field of education. Under the influence of existentialism, school is a place where students can exercise their free will, understand the importance of freedom of choice, and learn how to arrive at their own conclusions of what is true. School becomes a place of self-discovery, starting in elementary school and continuing into higher education. Existentialism influenced the curriculum of schools to focus on individual and personal learning. The idea of student-centered learning has its roots in existentialism. Under existentialism, the teacher has become a tool to help students realize their full potential. Existentialism can be reflected in many different ways in the classroom. Generally, in an existentialist-focused classroom, teacher lectures are not central to learning. The teacher's role would be a facilitator to the student's own personal discovery. The teacher would ask guiding questions, ask students to draw on their own experiences to arrive at conclusions, and let students learn at their own pace. The curriculum of the classroom would focus on individual work over group work. Universal theories would not be used in the classroom, rather, personal opinions and theories are emphasized.
For example, in an English classroom, students would discuss text to share their own feelings and opinions of what the story represented to them, and how they could apply the lessons of a text to their own lives and learning. Assignments would mainly be essays, letting students develop their own theses on a text. Students would have a say in what texts are read in the classroom and could even choose their own projects and stories.
In a history classroom, students would be encouraged to draw their own conclusions on how events of the past relate to their lives today, and what lessons and values should be learned from past actions. In this type of history classroom, the subjectivity of history would be emphasized, rather than presenting historical events as unbiased and universally true. Students would look at historical events from multiple points of view and decide which viewpoint they relate to.
In a math class, students would be encouraged to come up with their own proofs from mathematical rules, and the emphasis would be placed on finding a personal understanding of the process rather than memorizing procedures to solve problems. Students would work through problems on their own as opposed to teachers giving step-by-step procedures.
In conclusion, the main focus of existentialism is the individual and what they believe. And this philosophy is seen in schools today through the focus on student-centered learning and the importance of schools as a place of self-discovery.
Some critics, mainly traditionalists or conservatives, claim that existentialism has limited applications to schools because education in our society and in most other modern societies involves institutionalized learning and socialization, which require group instruction, restrictions on individuals' behavior, and bureaucratic organization. Schooling is a process that limits freedoms and is based on adult authority and generally accepted behavior and beliefs. As students, most of us follow rules. As teachers, most of us enforce rules. The individual existentialist exerting his or her will of choice will encounter difficulty in school and other formal organizations. Figure 2.1 illustrates the major philosophies related to education. Four agreed-on philosophies of education have emerged: perennialism, essentialism, progressivism, and reconstructivism. Each of these philosophies has roots in one or more of the four major philosophical traditions. For example, perennialism draws heavily on realism. Essentialism is rooted in idealism and realism, and progressivism and reconstructionism stems from pragmatism. Some reconstructivism has links to existentialist views as well. Perennial means everlasting, like a perennial flower that blooms year after year. Perennialism, the oldest and most conservative educational philosophy, has its roots in the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle. The perennialists believe that humans are rational and the aim of education is to improve man as man. To answer all educational questions derived from the answer to one question: what is human nature? According to them, human nature is constant and humans have the ability to educate and understand universal truths of nature. Thus, the aim of education is to develop the rational person and to uncover universal truths by training the intellect. Perennialism appeals to a small group of educators who stress intellectual meritocracy. Such educators emphasize testing, tougher academic standards and programs, and identification of gifted and talented students. They advocate a uniform curriculum, usually liberal arts, and few electives. For perennialists, educational equality results from providing all students with high-quality academic education. They believe tracking some students into a vocational curriculum would deny them an educational that's equal. Please refer to textbook pages 34 through 36 to review the significance of the Piaget proposal and the liberal arts as related to perennialism curriculum. Essentialism comes from the word essential, which means the main things or the basics. As an educational philosophy, it advocates instilling in students with the essentials or basics of academic knowledge and character development. Essentialism was grounded in the conservative philosophy that argues that schools should not try to radically reshape society. Rather, they should transmit traditional moral values and intellectual knowledge that students need to become model citizens. Essentialists believe that teachers should instill traditional virtues such as respect for authority, fidelity to duty, consideration for others, and practicality. Essentialism placed importance on science and understanding the world through scientific experimentation. Essentialism curriculum. The essential skills are the 3 R's: writing, reading, and arithmetic. Essential subjects: English, science, history, math, and foreign language. It is affected by the demand of the public to raise the academic standards and to improve students' work and mind, and subject to that of the contents are emphasized rather than the process. Essentialism curriculum include back to basic curriculum, excellence in education, and cultural literacy. Please refer to your text to find out more information about these topics. It is now time to view Essentialism in Action, a classroom lesson. Please refer to the links under your Moodle so that you can watch the video. Please answer any questions that may follow. Progressivism. Progressivism is a philosophical belief that argues that education must be based on the fact that humans are by nature social and learn best in real-life activities with other people. The person most responsible for progressivism was John Dewey. In Democracy and Education, Dewey claims that democracy and education go hand in hand. He viewed the school as a miniature democratic society in which students learned the skills necessary for democratic living and changing. Dewey saw little need to focus on a fixed body of knowledge. Progressivism emphasized how to think, not what to think. There are 3 types of progressive curriculum: relevant curriculum, humanistic education, and radical school reform. Refer to your text for more information about these topics. You also notice under the link section there is a video to show you a progressive curriculum in action. Please watch the video and answer any questions that may follow the video. Reconstructionism was a philosophy uniquely popular in the U.S. during the 1930s through the 1960s. Though the name was originally spoken by Dewey, it is largely the brainchild of Theodore Bramheld from Columbia Teachers College. Reconstructionists favor reform and argue that students must be taught how to bring about change. Reconstructionism is a philosophy that believes in the rebuilding of society and cultural infrastructures. Students are to study social problems and think of ways to improve society. Curriculum must be transformed in keeping with the social, economic, political education. It must incorporate reform strategies. For Reconstructionists, analysis, interpretation, and evaluation of problems are insufficient. Students and teachers must affect change. Society is always changing, and the curriculum has to change. A curriculum based on social issues and services is ideal. Today's Reconstructionist educators tend to be sensitive to global issues, which they analyze as a part of a larger social order. Historically, the United States has taken a relatively isolationist approach, but interdependence among nations no longer allows Americans to remain ignorant in developments in distant countries. Educators now feel the need to emphasize understanding other natures and cultures. Some Reconstructionist views include internationalists, reconceptionalists, and equal educational opportunity. Please look in your text to review more information about these topics. Table 2.3, as shown in your book, gives an overview of the educational philosophies that we just discussed. This concludes our discussion of Chapter 2. In conclusion, philosophy directs our actions. In the absence of a coherent philosophy, an educator is unduly influenced by external pressures. Major philosophical viewpoints have emerged within the curriculum field: idealism, realism, pragmatism, and existentialism. These viewpoints range from traditional and conservative to contemporary and liberal. They have influenced educational theories: perennialism, essentialism, which are traditional and conservative, and progressivism and reconstructionism, which are contemporary and liberal. No single philosophy, old or new, should exclusively guide decisions about schools and curriculum. The most important thing is that a school's approach to curriculum be politically and economically feasible and that it serve the needs of students and society. Too often, teachers and administrators plan and implement behavioral objections with minimal regard to a school's overall philosophy. Curriculum workers must develop the design school practices in harmony with the philosophy of the school community. This concludes our discussion of the chapter. Please feel free to go back and review and take notes about anything that was discussed. Remember, anything that was discussed in this video can be used on the final.